So this little video is going to be all about how to retrain a response for nosework and detection. So it can be challenging, this process, but it's by no means impossible, and we do it through what's called a differential schedule of reinforcement, which is a term that I'm sure other trainers are familiar with. It's a common strategy used in other areas of training and behaviour modification. And the way it works is that we have two behaviours, the unwanted one with a strong history of reinforcement normally, for argument's sake, it's going to be scratching, and the new desirable one, that'll be the focused response. So through a process of non-reinforcement of that old unwanted behaviour and a ton of reinforcement for the new desirable one, we hope that the dog will choose to engage in the new behaviour simply because of its history of reinforcement outweighing that of the old one. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm sure other trainers are familiar with the process, but this video is just going to be nosework specific. So there are 4 steps, and the first one is just going to be to define the replacement behaviour. The narrower and more specific the criteria, the better. Don't just say the focused response, actually define what that is. And I do that through 3 broad criteria. The first being that the dog works to the highest concentration of odour. The second being that the dog freezes with his nose at that place, the source of the odour. And 3, the dog doesn't leave source until you've marked. I'm sure you can break it down even further than that, but that's just what I look at personally. And the second step is to manage the environment to prevent the dog from rehearsing the unwanted behaviour. Rehearsal is reinforcement, and we don't want the dog to get any more reinforcement for that problem behaviour from this point forward. In the case of scratching, that'll mean moving the training aid to a height that prevents the dog from reaching it with his feet. Nose height when standing or above is ideal. Some dogs, it doesn't matter what you do, you can have the height on the roof and they're still going to try scratch it, but you get the idea. And the third step is just to train the new behaviour. In that first step, when you specify the behaviour and all the criteria, you've also established the foundation criteria to aim for. So that is working to the highest concentration of odour. Just work on that first, and that alone is often challenging for a scratcher. They tend to have the habit of just working in the vicinity of the odour before that leg springs up and they start scratching. So, just getting that nose to source can be a challenge in and of itself. But once that looks good, you can start building duration. And when that looks good, you can move on to that 4th step. And that is to start removing the management strategies. So I'm a really big fan of taking stock of all the variables that I've been using to manage the environment so the dog can't rehearse the unwanted behaviour. And the way I do that is to look at what training aid I'm using, the height I'm working at, and the environment that I'm working in. So the baseline searches, where we should be getting a nice reliable response by this point, has been the training aid has been a box, the height has been at nose height, and the environment has been the training area, the training lab I call it. So when we start taking those away, that the first session where we do that, we may start working with a box but changing the height, and in each successive search, just moving it lower and lower. In the session after that, the second session, assuming it all looks good in the first one, we may change the training aid but keep the height consistent at nose height. Once that looks good, we could combine the two and start working with different training aids at different heights. Until that looks good, and then move out of the training area and start generalizing the whole picture. And just a couple of pointers to round everything out. The first being to mark before the dog has a chance to scratch. This is probably the most common problem I see people face, is that they ask for too much too soon, and the dog begins questioning what they're doing, and they just jump to that old behaviour too quick. The second being to interrupt any scratching behaviour if the dog does try, and help the dog back to source as soon as possible. And the third being to stick the course. Don't accept scratching in one context and try to get the focused response in another. It doesn't work that way. You're just going to confuse the dog. So anyway, I hope that video was helpful. Feel free to ask questions below or by comment or contacting me personally. Happy sniffing.